Hello, good morning. Welcome to today's presentation brought to you by the Life Sciences team at ReedTech. Today's topic is about unique device identification for medical devices and specifically the current guidance for requirements and exemptions for the USFDA Class I data submission date. And that's now only about 150 days away. The meeting is being recorded and all audience members are muted. We do encourage questions and do please submit them at any time using the chat box. We'll cover as many as possible during the Q&A at the end. And if you're having technical difficulties hearing the audio through your computer, try calling the phone number listed in the email invite or on the screen by clicking on phone call. The slides and the video link will be distributed via email in a day or so to all registrants, and do share those with your team. We are pleased to host our guest panelists today from Symmetric Health Solutions. We have Terry Reed, who's the Director of Partner Relationships with Symmetric Health Solutions. She spent the last 15 years advocating for a safer, better functioning medical device ecosystem. As an FDA Associate Director of Informatics and later as Senior Advisor for UDI adoption, she coordinated across multiple stakeholders, including government agencies, standards development organizations, industry, and healthcare systems, advocating for the use of UDI and the data in the Good ID as a public regulatory source of device ID information. We also have the CEO of Symmetric Health Solutions, Rich Kucera, and he's also a co-founder. And they are a healthcare supply chain data aggregation, cleansing, and enablement company with products used by over 600 hospitals. So really interesting work there. They specialize in healthcare provider back office data management, analytics, procurement, and inventory management. And of course, our moderator and host, Gary Sainer, he's our Senior Manager of Information Solutions at ReedTech. Gary's a subject matter expert on medical device, UDI information, and other structured content reporting to regulatory agencies and commercial organizations. He's got over 30 years of experience in software development, process management, and data administration, with the last 15 focused on life sciences. He's also chair of the industry's structured product labeling technical team and on the advisory board of the medical devices group. I'm Angela Alexandro with the marketing team here at ReedTech. Next up, I'm going to toss it over to Rich to tell us a little bit more about Symmetric Health Solutions.
Thanks, Angela. Hello, everyone. Rich Kucera. Symmetric Health Solutions is a data aggregation, cleansing, and enrichment solution, as Angela mentioned. We have a web application, API, and data feeds where we refresh and pull from well over 100 different data sources every night and maintain item information on, at this point, over 12 million items and over 400 attributes that get fed into healthcare ERP and EHR systems on a nightly basis. A big focus of our companies is the adoption of UDI. This has become a very important attribute for healthcare operations, as well as very core attributes like item descriptions, better understanding products, and their classifications. But I think we'll be talking a little bit more about that in a few slides.
Terrific. And just a little bit of background about ReedTech. We specialize in the preparation, submission, and lifecycle data management of MedDevice UDI product information. We've been out there since the first mandate in 2014. ReedTech's been involved in SPL knowledge from guidance, pilots, and trade groups like MedTech Europe. We've submitted over 730,000 SPLs to FDA Good ID and are currently working with testing for UDIMED. We have channels available for the US, EU, China, and South Korea, and other authorities on the roadmap. And Single Source for Medical Devices has served over 450 medical device customers, and that's from small to large record counts. And we do have within that system flexible role assignments for in-country authorized representatives and corporate users for a shared view into data. So on today's agenda, it's pretty packed. You will definitely get an education about UDI. We're going to start with UDI definition and goals. We'll talk about the USFDA requirements for the Class I that's coming up this September, and also what are some exceptions there. We'll look at the difference between label data versus good ID submission data, the importance of label standardization, the importance of FDA good ID submission and maintenance, and also how manufacturers can improve industry adoption and use of UDI, as you'll see how important it is to downstream stakeholders. Also, we'll talk a little bit about planning your UDI data strategy for the US and then for global, and a little bit about how ReadTech can help and Symmetric Health Solutions. So with that, I will turn it over to our moderator, Gary Sainer, to launch us into UDI definition and goals.
Well, thank you very much, Angela, and we're excited to walk through this material with you folks. It's a pleasure and an honor to have Terry and Rich join us. Thank you so much for setting aside time and joining in the conversation today. We do have a lot to discuss. I do want to mention that UDI has this UDI or global connection to it. So it's just not a point solution at the US. There's other activities in Europe. If you're an IVD manufacturer, for example, and a couple weeks away, there's the in vitro diagnostic regulation date of application and implications for your self-certified Class A products. Other places, China, Saudi Arabia, and South Korea all have some activities middle of this year that come into play. So we don't have time to go through all of those and discuss those. There's some additional pages down in the appendix that you might want to look at when you receive the materials about the global roadmap and the timeline of implementations and some snippets there. But what we'll do is start with a quick foundation with UDI. We understand that some of those people in the audience are Class I manufacturers and only, and maybe approaching UDI for the first time or relatively starting along their pathway, relatively new. So we'll hit a couple slides here in the beginning to talk about the basics. We'll work our way through rather quickly and leave some things for homework. But what we want to do is take care of this. First of all, what is UDI definition? And you have heard it many times, and those that are working with it with other class products with the US, it's been around for a number of years, but we have this two-component composition. We have a device identifier that is fixed. It's always there. It identifies the labor in a specific version and model of a medical device. And then the second component is this production identifier. Conditional, if these particular controls are on the label, then they need to be embedded in the UDI. So if you simply concatenate those two together, the device identifier and the production identifier, you come up with a full UDI. And some examples here down at the bottom would include that device identifier. Using GS1 just as an example, it's one of those approved issuing agencies, very commonly used. And then you add to that the device, the production identifier portion, and that can get quite long if you have all those particular controls. And there's some additional flags and attributes in that particular string that identify the particular values that would follow. So that's a quick summary of what UDI is. And for those that are Class I coming on board, we very frequently get the question, what are these goals? Why do I need to comply with this? What was the FDA thinking? So if we look at some of the topics that the FDA had shared as to their goals, and this was rolled out in a final rule back in 2013. So some of these activities have been in place for a while. Some were able to be started pretty quickly, and others take time. So I will quickly give a personal example. The very first one, device identification. Recently, my wife had to stay in a hospital, so I'm, the UDI obsessed. So I'm checking the hospital beds, the IV pump, you know, all the glove boxes, you know, do these things have UDI? And for the most part, there were a lot of good representation there with UDI, a couple exceptions. But I'm going to ask Terry to jump in. She was with FDA at the time this particular rule was being crafted and rolled out. Terry, I'd like you to maybe highlight some of these items to help the audience understand what was the FDA thinking, what is the targeted impact, and maybe give a report card, you know, on some of these particular items. How well did we do here?
Well, thanks, Gary. I've known Gary for 16 years, so we've been on this journey for quite a while. You know, I stumbled across some notes. You know how on your iPhone you have a notepad? I stumbled across some notes that I actually took as part of the UDI team in like 2013, a couple weeks ago, just coincidentally. And in those notes, what does it mean? Like, why are we doing this? And it really was for patient safety purposes, for improving the ability of a patient to understand what is their implant. And we are starting to get there. FDA worked, so on the scorecard part, FDA worked with the Office of National Coordinator for Health IT. I know a lot of people on this call probably don't know who that ONC group is, but if you've ever gone to a doctor and they start having iPads, electronic health records, ONC is the one that incentivized our doctors and hospitals to use electronic health records. So FDA worked with ONC to make sure that UDI could be recorded in those electronic health records. So to me, that is a really important piece. In addition to that, that's implants though, but we have a lot of Class I manufacturers on the call. In addition to that, we just have high scores, I think, for FDA for just disrupting the market, getting the attention of manufacturers and healthcare providers to create this standard identifier that didn't exist essentially before 2013. And as my colleagues at Symmetric remind me a lot, before the UDI database with its now over 3 million records existed, there was no publicly available standard source of device identification information. In fact, UDIMED is not publicly accessible to a degree that Access Good ID is. So it still retains this publicly, the only source of publicly available data. So it's really important for manufacturers to submit their data there. Another, okay, so I can't have all the positives without a little bit of, areas for improvement. I don't think FDA has spoken enough about UDI and really how important it is for linking initiatives that they're underway. And as an example of this, and I really want to get the attention of manufacturers, reducing exposure of patients to recalled products, even Class I products, is a major issue for hospitals and manufacturers themselves, because there's a lot of significant resources and lots of manual efforts to identify recalled products and prevent harms to patients. And those manufacturers and hospitals that have incorporated UDI into their recall management show a significant return on investment for themselves, for their customers and patients. FDA is not requiring UDI in recalls because UDIs aren't on all products. But if you have a UDI on your product, strongly encourage you to make sure that that UDI is represented in any future recall information. And again, I could go on and on, but I'll stop and let you go on with the slides.
There was a number of challenges or waves or objectives, I think is the actual term that the FDA used, to accomplish those goals. And it appeared to have a time sequence and a rolling sequence. And you're probably best to talk about this, Terry. What was the issues here about starting with the manufacturer and then rolling it out through industry, through time with additional implementations.
Right, and we are on that timeline. So I had a similar slide when I was at FDA that I would present, kind of showing how important the manufacturer is in this equation, because you see all data kind of flows from your submission. The manufacturer is the source of the UDI data on the label and in the global UDI database for use by all of those you see here, the regulatory agencies where Access, Good ID, and UDIMED and all the other UDI databases fall, for data aggregators like Symmetric, electronic health records, as I mentioned, for use by healthcare providers and patients. We've kind of touched on that also this morning. The vision for the system was for all manufacturers in a particular jurisdiction to submit to one place. So in the US, Access Good ID, and UDIMED in the EU. And really the original vision and why we called it Global UDI Database was that we envisioned a distributed network. Imagine these UDI databases all around the world, and that they could eventually be connected as an open source of key information through that UDI DI, recognizing that every country is not going to have every UDI DI, the same ones, but that there would be overlap. And actually Symmetric is seeing that. We've done some work with the World Health Organization, and we see overlap between countries who share the same UDI DIs. And that information is so valuable for sharing information about post-market surveillance between countries, for seeing mappings between nomenclatures and classifications, and we've been a part of that. One thing I'd like to add to this slide, and it's not shown, but is a feedback loop, and we'll talk about this later. But manufacturer, going to the patient and the users of that information, those UDI information, you never actually know how usable and how much quality that data is until it's used. And the users want to provide feedback to manufacturers. A feedback loop that kind of circles back, and having manufacturers respond to that feedback makes the entire system have higher integrity and be more valuable to everyone.
Yeah, very good. If there is nothing else, I'm going to move to another slide. I believe Rich had some information about particular instance for hospitals. So can you fill us in a little bit, Rich, on this particular scenario?
Yeah. I guess to really start this off, this is a slide that we show hospitals when we're starting to talk with them. And really everything our company does came out of what manufacturers are submitting to Access Good ID, as well as their pre-market approval documents, etc. The company was born out of looking at all of that information and realizing if hospitals could get at it more easily, match to those data sets and pull it into their systems, we could start solving a lot of problems that exist in operations today. And I like to think that given our growth over the past 4 years, that it's very telling that that is true. So taking really the Good ID and other regulatory and public sources and normalizing hospital item masters, aligning their systems to things like UDI DIs amongst system to system so that they can talk to one another are extremely beneficial. You start to solve things like better understanding of inventory stock, what other procurement options exist. So what are all the different manufacturers that exist out there for a given category of products, especially during the pandemic, really understanding who all manufactures gloves. That was a very difficult question that many hospitals struggled with, as well as government bodies. But looking forward to really that value-based care model of clinical integration, what's going to be extremely important is the embrace of UDI by manufacturers across all types of items, because one thing that our company has really tried to solve is if some things have some attributes like UDI and some don't, that's extremely difficult in a hospital to make two different processes. Essentially, if some categories are like this, we do this, versus some other types of items, we do a different process. It's really hard to make standard operating procedures, instructions, training, really need to have one standard across the board that everyone understands and can use. And if you go to the next slide, we're seeing that this is a problem around the world. So very quickly, we started looking at other countries' data sets, working with the WHO, other regulatory bodies, and seeing that this is not only going to be a challenge within the hospitals, but this is going to be a challenge across the world. So we're happy to share that we've seen that the putting together of all these different data sets is not unique to the US. And in fact, there is large overlap, and that can be utilized in other countries like the UK and Middle East that we're actively in to solve those challenges, but also still recognizing gaps, especially in these more commodity type products, which are very critical. On the right here is just some of the industry participation that hospitals, I can attest to, are very active in. So if you ever want to hear more about what hospitals are saying around UDI or their feedback to Good ID, that's a great place to check out. A lot of the different white papers and polls and whatnot are publicly available amongst those organizations.
You know, that's a great point, Rich. And ARM in particular has a lot of work groups that manufacturers participate in. Be happy to have new members. They are tasked with, there's an MOU between FDA and ARM, which is the Association for Materials Managers, American Hospital Association. And that MOU is trying to find ways to increase UDI adoption in healthcare. And so manufacturers participate to better serve their customers and patients, better understand hospital needs through active work groups. So.
All right, very good. I think that's a really good platform to understand where FDA was coming from, and now as it propagates around the world, realizing that it's not a real easy flip the switch sort of thing to have all this be embedded into industry, and the implementation takes time and a lot of effort. Angela, I believe you have two poll questions queued up, and I believe you were planning to do those back to back. So maybe this is a good time to go ahead and launch those.
Yeah. So hopefully everyone sees the first one on the screen. Just real simple. Are you working with your hospital customers on projects related to Good ID? So just go ahead and make a selection. Appreciate your participation here. And we'll share the results since everyone's voted. Okay, so it looks like we've kind of got those responses in. So I'm going to close this one, and then we will share those results. So most people not, but there are some people out there that are working with hospital customers on projects related to Good ID. Very well. Okay, so let's go to number 2. So if you can tell us, is meeting the UDI regulatory requirements for Class 1 the first time you've been involved with UDI compliance? So go ahead and cast your votes on screen there. Just click on your selection. And this is looking pretty interesting. All right, so let's see. We've got about 60% voted. Okay, so I'm going to close this poll. So interesting split there. So 43% said yes and 57% said no. Okay, interesting results there.
All right, very good. So I think what we'll do then is touch on the basics. A lot of good introduction about why we need to do a UDI and do it correctly and do it comprehensively. I'm going to step through 4 major aspects of FDA UDI regulation. First one has to do with those requirements regarding a label. So there is this requirement to place the UDI in various, two formats, a human readable and also a data automatic identification and data capture, referred to as AIDC. That really transposes to and translates into either a one-dimensional or a two-dimensional barcode. And then there is a subset of all those medical devices out there that qualify and meet the criteria for being permanently marked. So if they are used on different patients for multiple use, and if they're reprocessed with high-level disinfection and sterilization between those applications, then there's some direct mark additional requirements. In the upper right there, we have this requirement to report the device identifier and a number of attributes, 57 attributes, to the FDA's database, the Good ID. And in the bottom right, not too frequently mentioned, but should not be forgotten, there are a number of standard operating procedures and policies that you have in place in your corporation that need to include UDI. Many times this is revising documentation that you might have already in place, making sure you have retention for records and so on. Now, the timing for all this was scheduled by the risk class. So going back to 2014 for that first deadline for class 3s, and then progressing through a number of years. Originally, the class 1 deadline for submission and placement of UDI on the label was in 2018, but there was some concerns on the behalf of the FDA about some of the quality that was previously submitted, so they wanted to make sure that companies revised and updated data and give them additional time for class 2, so they moved that date out 2 years to 2020. And then guess what? September 2020, what was happening? COVID. So there was a lot of concern with resources at the FDA, and certainly on the industry side, the manufacturers just being able to comply. So right now we're sitting at September 24 of 2022, just this fall, short 5 months away. And Terry, I'd like to just do a check with you. You were involved in some of these, or at least aware of some of these delays. What's the situation? Do you think there might be a delay for the current deadline?
I hope not. I really do, for the sake of hospitals and manufacturers, as we'll talk about later. But as you mentioned, Gary, it was around 2016. I was at FDA, and I was actually seeing some of the challenges with UDI adoption at the time, and all of the data quality issues. Yep. And that was really the reason for that delay, in 2018. But I guess I want to emphasize the reason I don't want this delay is because this, as Rich mentioned, that database really has to be complete, and it has to contain all products. And class 1 is a key and significant part of the things that hospitals purchase. Having your data in Good ID allows you to be visible to your customers, for one thing. The other part of this is, back in 2016, even in 2018, everybody was kind of, what is the phrase? Creating the plane as we were, trying to set the rules about it. Now there's such a 10 years of collective experience I mentioned the ARM Learning UDI community. Class I manufacturers shouldn't feel like they're alone in this, or that if they have questions, you all at Reed Technology have tremendous amount of experience, as you showed in this data. There's also I was a little, I would caution about the answer to the poll question, in that reaching out to your customers about UDI is a very good advice. We had a study done that those manufacturers who reached out to their customers found it easier to come up with the data to submit because they understood the people who were using that data, created better customer relationships. So I guess we're at a point of maturity where there's just really no reason. I would even go so far to say that if FDA delayed for some reason that we are not aware or can't anticipate, that manufacturers should voluntarily submit the data for their own good, for their customers' value, because it really is a win-win.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, well, thank you for those comments. Keep our fingers crossed, and we'll see what happens in September. But I have not heard any other rumors or indication that there would be a delay. So definitely want to plan for that particular deadline to be in place. Now, on this particular slide, this is what I affectionately call the note card for the US FDA. Summarizes a lot of the data. Most importantly, in the bottom left down here is this Class I deadline for September. We won't go through the details here. It's really just kind of a heads up. There's a number of these note cards for the different health authorities. So there's like 4 additional ones in the appendix for China, South Korea, and Saudi Arabia, and so on. So it is there for your reference later on. We'll leave that for your homework. Now, moving over to some of the exceptions. There are a number of provisions that are provided in the final rule and the regulations, and in some cases more recently guidance documents that have come out. So we touched on these 4 basic areas that a Class I company would need to comply with regarding UDI, but there are a number of special exceptions and clauses, and we'll touch on those in the next few slides. So the first one in the top left here, if it's Class I with a UPC on the label, that particular UPC barcode and value, that code, is accepted as the full UDI. So that's good news if you've been using UPC for 5 years and you're in the retail business. Most likely you have. So that is good news there. And then in the bottom left, if you had Class I with a UPC label, then and if you needed to place direct marking on that particular product, you can claim this exception where direct marking is not required for that scenario as long as you have UPC in Class I. And then upper right, recently there was a guidance document that came out that indicated that Class I's with over-the-counter that were sold exclusively to the retail market did not need to submit data to the Good ID. That's a little concerning because now we have a major gap, and we're going to talk a lot more about that in the next few minutes. And then the bottom right there, if your product was Class I and it had good manufacturing practice exemption connected with it, then UDI is not required at all. So again, this would leave a gap if you did not comply with the identification on the label, and certainly, if you didn't report data to the Good ID. Again, another source of omission there that would be concerning. So we're going to take a few minutes, just kind of step through some of the details on these particular exceptions. I'm going to leave a lot of this for homework, so working my way through rather quickly. So this is the first one about if your product was Class I with good manufacturing practice exemption. And that can be easily checked and verified by looking up the product code. So this is the product code ITJ for walker, mechanical walker. I'm very familiar with these right now. We have one downstairs and upstairs, but noteworthy is that it had a good manufacturing exemption status of yes. So there would have not necessarily be any requirement. It's Class I, so everything fits the criteria. Now, I had talked to Terry and Rich earlier, and there's like over 400 of these devices already in the good ID. So some companies have taken it upon themselves to go ahead and submit anyway, and we'll talk more about that. For time, I'm going to move on to the next exception, which was all Class Is do not have to have a production identifier portion. So we looked at this construct a little bit earlier, where there was this device identifier portion followed by this production identifier portion for those controls. If you have a Class I, then you don't need to include that in the UDI. So that's impacting certainly the labeling design. The third one is this Class I with UPC on the label. This has a scenario where you can use that UPC, and this should look familiar if you fit into this category, where you don't have a 14-digit identifier, again, using GS1 as the example. You have in place of that a G10 12-digit identifier that's meeting the standard of UPC. So this probably is what you're currently in place, but that particular symbology does not have any provision for production identifiers to be added. So, you know, that fits in and aligns itself very well. I will mention one thing while we're on this slide. If you have any dates that are presented on the label itself, it needs to be in this year dash month day format. And the last one we'll just touch on is if you meet the criteria of a consumer health product sold exclusively directly to consumers. So just to kind of summarize what we've talked about there, if you're a Class I and you have marketing your products to professional use, hospitals, clinics, and so on, UDI does apply. But then if you meet this criteria of marketing only to the retail market, the consumer product market, then, you know, examples of your electronic toothbrush, for example, you would not need to submit to data to the FDA Good ID. You still have other UDI requirements. Not all of that has been set aside, but really just the submission part. And then if you're in between, so you might have, let's say you manufacture Band-Aids. I can buy Band-Aids in the retail arena, you know, go to Walmart's or Rite Aid and any other prescription and buy Band-Aids. But when I go to my doctor and I get a flu shot, for example, they use Band-Aids as well. So Band-Aids are used in both the professional setting and the consumer retail setting. If that's the case, then you still need to apply UDI. So the exception that we talked about for consumer health products, again, exclusively only in the retail market. And then just to complete this graphic, the very low risk of good manufacturing practice exemption, you know, like these walkers, would not need to comply with UDI. But again, there's some concerns about creating gaps in the database and then downstream use. What we'd like to touch on right now is talk a little about what goes on the label and what is reported. So the next few slides are develop this particular concept. For many years, you've always placed product labels, you know, on your, you know, products that you're shipping out the door. That's nothing new. This is a revision to what you have. In some cases, you might already comply. So if you're using UPC, you're in a good place there. Check your dates, make sure it has that full format. But the lower data stream is brand new. You have not been doing this before, unless you had some previous Class I products or Class 3s and 2s and so on. But for Class I, this might be brand new data stream of collecting data, putting it in place into a system and submitting it to the FDA, and then making it available to the public. Rich and Terry, maybe you want to talk about this because this becomes the venue, the avenue of data that goes out to the public, and this device identifier, whether it's a UPC or this blown. Do you just want to talk for a second about the importance of making sure that this number is there and it's correct?
Yeah, I'm happy to go first. I think it's absolutely important that there are checks in place before these labels are going out the door. I can attest from our experience of hospital scanning that we've seen every mistake you could have possibly imagine on these labels. So we've seen things like HIBIC UPNs encoded into GS1 G10s. We've seen certain mistakes like parentheses included or not included and replaced in the barcode. All these things really could have been caught early on if manufacturers attempted to scan it themselves before the label went out. And it's really critical, as I've mentioned before, to hospital operations. If you were at the grocery store and you went to scan something and you heard it, and now you had to stand and wait and type in all these numbers, you'd be pretty frustrated. So if you're not checking these things and that happens, that's what you're causing all of your customers to go through. So.
Yeah, Terry, did you want to add something to that about making sure this?
Not really. The scannable part of this is so essential, and trying to reflect what's on this label in good ID, like the company name and like matching that label so that somebody looks at that product and looks at the data in good ID knows it's the same thing and can scan it easily. Hospitals, unlike grocery stores, you might have a few minutes if something doesn't scan correctly. At a hospital, they don't have a few minutes to be messing around with things that don't scan.
Oh yeah, I'll mention that during the hospital stay, my wife's band was scanned, I don't know, probably 100 times. Every visit with the nurse, every time there was medication, every time there was procedure, barcoding is scanned and verified and checked. And they know that this is a means to increase the quality of care. So making sure that it's available on the medical devices as well, I think, promotes that idea as well. Now, moving over to the data that is actually submitted, this is the full list of attributes that the FDA has in place at the Good ID. And 57 of these are submitted. The FDA derives some additional attributes. But you see some that are in red and they are marked as being required. So there's a pretty good percentage that are, quote, optional in the eyes of industry. Now, I've kind of taken upon myself to figure out some that would not typically be used by a Class I manufacturer, but that still leaves a lot on the table here. And we want to make the point here that there are some fields in here, and we'll talk just in a second about these fields that are very important to industry that are either conditional or optional. Is catalog number, the device description, the product code, the FDA product code, some of the information about size and so on. We just want to encourage those to think about downstream users and being able to access this information. We'll touch a little bit more on that in a second. Before we go there, we want to mention that there are multiple ways to transmit that data to the FDA Good ID. And there is a web interface which you can log in and manually type your data in. Obviously, there's labor-intensive activity there, expected transcription errors. So doing a quality check is typically recommended to make sure that you do that. And the other options, other than doing this manually entry idea, is to use electronic submissions using an electronic file. This is a Health Level 7 standard referred to as Structured Product Labeling, SPL. And that particular file is XML based, but it uses the electronic submission gateway. So this is an electronic submission, it happens, in seconds. Preparing that is a little bit of a challenge. So you might build a system on your own to extract data and prepare that SPL file and do the submission and do the connection to the electronic submission gateway. Or you could buy a system and install it, validate it, train, and so on. Both of those, with the time frame, might be a little bit of a concern. Building is certainly not going to be, in my opinion, out of the question in 5 months. So the pretty high costs involved in both of those. The other option down here at the bottom is to make use of a system that may be offered by an industry vendor or supplier that has a system already in place, and you basically subscribe to a system that's hosted. So this software as a service model is one that you can very readily start up. The cost is shared among all the different users, so each one has a little bit of investment, but not incurring the full development cost individually. So this is actually the model that RETEC uses, but it's one of the ones that we think has a lot of benefits. Shuffles the data over very quickly, accurately in electronic fashion. Now, once the data is there, we won't go into the details here, but there are a number of guidelines and rules about the timing and maintaining data. So if you have an update to a record and that particular changes on the label, you have a requirement to submit it before you actually put that label in commercial distribution. If a particular attribute is not on the label, then you might, well, you do have 10 days to make that update. So there's some other scenarios here. I'll leave that for homework. What I'd like to do now is just move over to some suggestions on how you could improve your downstream use, better position yourself in industry. So make sure that the data that is reported is of high quality and able to be used by industry. And in some cases, that puts you at an advantage over your competitors. If you have good set of data, high quality, and so on. I'm going to leave this to Terry and Rich, since we are very fortunate to have them, guest speakers here, to talk about these particular topics. And just, are you able to fill us in on some of the things that manufacturers might do to position themselves, at a better place for industry?
I'll start off and then turn it over to Rich for,
Okay.
Just from a regulatory perspective, these could be check the box, submit accurate data, check for typos, check for values, comply with the data requirements in Good ID and all of those exceptions. And, you could easily go through and make sure that you've done each and every one of these things. The reason Rich and I are, and I'm so happy that Gary, asked us to join you, is that even when I was at FDA, we told manufacturers, please don't just check the box, that go beyond and understand, like, things that are optional may be important to users. If I have one regret about the Good ID rollout and what we included, it was catalog number and contact info. Those were two that I wish we had made required, because matching old data to new is really important, and giving feedback to manufacturers is really important. I'll hand it over to Rich to talk about maybe some specifics in the hospitals.
Yeah. I think one big thing that we've heard over and over again, and maybe jumping down to that final bullet point, is hospitals want to give feedback to manufacturers. They would love to submit, like, hey, like, it would be great if we knew this size of the product. We need it for XYZ reason. There's really not an avenue for that today. Obviously, you could reach out to like a generic email address or something, but certain manufacturers we've seen like really embrace that, putting the contact information and fielding questions from customers and updating the data. It's tremendously valuable for procurement in the hospital to make sure they're ordering correctly. The clinicians actually understanding what the products are, and when they're looking at it in a system to requisition something to a buyer, they can see what all the different manufacturer options are, descriptions, how they're different from one another, and really pick what they need. So not to push too much, but I would have to imagine from a manufacturer's perspective that it's good to submit this information. It's essentially great marketing. Your data will be seen by hospitals. It'll be used in RFPs, procurement. It'll be appearing in hospitals' catalogs for adding to contracts and etc. So I really do think to voluntarily submit the data, make sure it's clean and good, and accurate representation of what's on the label is definitely beneficial.
Yeah, I think one of the key takeaways is this phrase over here, this submission should be comprehensive, not necessarily just the minimum data set. I know that this comes up in so many conversations we have with clients, and one of the first questions is, well, what's the minimum that I have to do? And I understand that position. You know, it's less work, it's faster turnaround. You know, I can check the box. The implication, though, is in the omission there is realizing what happens downstream with those particular fields that you could have filled in and you elected not to. Does that put you in a worse position compared to your competitors? Does that make it very difficult for those hospitals, those doctors, the clinics, and the downstream users to use your data and to mine your data? So one of the other aspects of this information is being able to do analysis and be able to do very granular, focused analysis of what's happening in the market. And if you don't put some information in, it's really hard to relate that all together. Now there is another slide here, Rich, that you included about the this looks like a Access Good ID screenshot of a particular Class I, and are there some things here that you want to highlight?
Oh, apologies that it wasn't as grainy, but really just highlighting we're seeing a huge uptake over the past 6 months in our data refreshes every night, that more and more manufacturers are submitting things that would be exempt, and we just wanted to showcase that.
Yeah, okay, very good. This is another example of that mechanical walker that you didn't need to. This looks like elastic bandage, okay, regular like a band-aid sort of thing, but certainly you're able to submit that information. All right, well, that's very good. I'd like to turn the conversation a little bit. We understand the data, making it available to the industry. One of the other questions that we get is, how do I go about planning my strategy? What do I need to do? Time's marching on. I was, if I was a Class I manufacturer, maybe I was hoping that this would be pushed back once more and I didn't have to do it this year. And now I'm down in the crunch of procrastinated to the nth degree. Here are some suggestions about moving forward. These are 5 steps. We won't go into the details here, but basically you want to put a process in place, gather the team together, understand what you have to comply with, what is your portfolio, and start preparing your data. Step 2, finding your data, first of all, where it is, and then normalizing, make sure it validates to the FDA business rules, and then having a system in place for managing that data and submitting it. Number 3 there. There's some accounts that obviously need to be created. And then 4, make sure that the labeling aspect is taken care of. You need perhaps to upgrade your system or make changes. Certainly, in some cases, you're going to have to redesign labels. You need to test those labels. There's something called barcode verification that you might will need to look into. And then lastly, step 5 is this actual flip the switch, turn on the operation, interface, the ramp down of products without UDI and the ramp up with products with UDI. And the bottom line down there is prepare for international UDI. So there's other regions. This is a very good stepping stone learning curve to comply with other health authorities as they come on board. Now, we put together a rather aggressive timeline for the remaining 5 months. So there's some account setups here in the beginning. Those usually go pretty quickly, depending on your product identification standards that you use now. Hopefully you can use some that are already in place. If not, you'll need to subscribe to one of those issuing agencies and map your identifiers to those new standards, and then make sure you take care of the labeling aspect. And then there's this challenge of collecting data. We have seen 80% of your effort here is on collecting data, validating it, cleansing it to the business rules. And if you use electronic submissions and have a scheme to do that, the actual submission goes very quickly, and select a number of records, push a button to send, sort of thing. So that is not the most critical piece. We have found that the collecting the data, cleansing it, and meeting business rules is a largest part of your time. More than one resource, full-time equivalent sort of thing. So this becomes variable depending on the volume and the condition of your products, but this is what you want to focus on after you take care of some of these initial setups. All right, so nearing the end of the conversation here, just wanted to make sure that you're aware that we can help you. You don't have to do this on your own. There is a solution that we offer, referred to as the RETEC single source for medical device. It's a platform that is scalable, certainly been successful submitting data to the FDA, and now it's set up for other regions around the world. But we're able to accept data electronically, and with varying levels of workflow. You can manually process data. You can have it configured so that it automatically processes data and simply becomes a data hub, and submits data off to the FDA. So a number of different capabilities and flexible options there to make your life easier. And all this particular data is validated in a compliant 21 Part 11 environment type of system. So the storage is there, the particular functions of processing the data, managing it, and being able to submit to your downstream users is all there. We have put together a little package and available on the website, focusing in on some of those Class I manufacturers that might have a pretty low quantity of products, so maybe only 25 or less products, and there's some benefits and a targeted offering just for you folks. And then certainly if you don't fit that category, there's other types of offerings and configurations that fit your model. So we go from very small, I have a single product that I need to submit, to those manufacturers that have hundreds of thousands of data to submit. And Angela, I think you have made this available on the website. So do you want to talk a little bit about this particular link and some other resources that we have here?
Yep. So definitely check us out at retech.com. We also have a couple of handouts in the webinar tool if you want to download those with information about Symmetric Health Solutions and about our Class I program for the smaller number of SKUs. We frequently have events like this, so follow us on LinkedIn or Twitter and do register. We do send the links to the recording and the slides for all of our events after the event to all registrants. So those will be coming to you shortly once we package all of this up. Also, there's a couple of contact slides here to contact RETEC at MedDevice@retech.com Also, contact Symmetric Health Solutions if you have some questions about their offerings. We do have a number of questions that came in. We might have time to take just a couple, Gary, if we're ready to take a couple questions here.
Yeah, please, let's knock them out.
There's one about, if it's a sticky label that's on a device and the UDI is a sticky label, is that considered direct marking?
Well, I think the requirements for direct marking is that it persists in a durable fashion for the life of the product. So that particular product, because it's because it's meeting the criteria for direct marking, will be reprocessed. So the sterilization process might take a sticky little label off the product. So think about, is this going to be able to be cleaned? Is it going to be able to be subject to those high disinfectant and sterilization processes and still persist for the whole life of the product? So some companies use different technologies. It's not one is required, but very commonly used is laser etching. So it's laser etched into the product. Certainly, if you have a durable label and it's able to stay on the product for that life of the product, including the cleaning, that's all acceptable.
Okay. How about what are the USFDA data attributes that cause the most errors for submissions?
Terry, do you want to pick that one up?
Errors in terms of, maybe you want to talk about it from hospital perspective?
Some of the data attributes that will kick out with errors, that maybe there's a misunderstanding on interpretation of what is being asked for, that kind of thing. When we're talking about the 57 data attributes.
Right. Well, I think rather than, catalog number, not putting it in, a lot of times it's the incompleteness, or like description, putting NA. Having something there is better than not. And when again, it goes back to these principles. I had so many people asking me at FDA, what does FDA want me to put into this field? And I would say, go to your customers, understand your products, and understand what they want. And think of it, you have marketing people, you have people who deal with your customers. Maybe the regulatory staff don't, but there are people in your organization that understand what your customers need. And that's what I would put in. And I know that FDA would never say, oh, to meet this regulatory requirement, we want you to say something completely different for us at FDA than what your customers would want to see in that information. That would just not happen. This is supposed to be like we showed that slide for those downstream users, for regulators, of course, but also for healthcare in general.
Yeah, I think some of the things that have popped up on top of what Terry had mentioned there, on a daily basis, we see issues regarding the issuing number for the actual product. A lot of times that is a challenge. Either it's outdated, or it's the wrong one, or it's not. There's a typo and there's not the correct digits there. That is cross-checked by the FDA against the registration and listing database. So you need to make sure that is correct. A lot of errors in that regard. And also there's issues with the global medical device nomenclature, GMDN. Those particular codes, as you know, Terry, they have migrated their dictionary, and sometimes they take particular value, a code, and they deprecate it, and now it's no longer available. But they split it into some minor granular ones, that sort of thing. So that becomes an issue. And then I think some of the other errors might be some values for device identifiers for the packaging labels and so on. There are cross checks now actually for the check digit and so on. So that type of errors are checked and found before they're actually published, but they frequently come up as errors as well.
Packaging sizes, that's another one.
Oh yeah.
Units of measure, packaging.
Well, we had some really detailed, great questions that came in. Appreciate folks that submitted questions, and we will diligently research those and get back to you individually after this call. Again, we'll be in touch with links that you can share with your teams. Huge thank you to Terry and Rich from Symmetric Health Solutions for joining us today. Really just great content, and watch for other invites in the future to similar events for updates on regulators around the world. Thanks and have a great day.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.